I learned a trick recently that headphones, the left ear is always the one with the cord.
Oh, you're
So
totally right.
it's, you can feel cool now when you show up somewhere, just so natural about it, sticking on the headphones.
Wow. That's fascinating. See, that's some pro level podcaster stuff right there. It's like you put on several different sets of headphones.
I have. And the benefit of having lots of musicians, I guess, around.
Yeah. Yeah, you should be able to drag that wherever you want it.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah, so welcome.
Thanks, Bud.
I'm excited to have you. This is awesome.
Yeah, this is a great space. It's nice to be on the other side of the microphone too.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's great to have you here in person, and I love your art. I mean, that's how we connected. I found you on Instagram, and just beautiful art. So there's a lot of different kinds of art. Obviously, there's probably an infinite number of different kinds. What drew you to what you're doing? First of all, maybe what are you doing, and then what drew you to that?
Sure. Well, thanks for saying that. I'm an abstract artist, and the style or the technique that I use is often referred to as fluid art. So I'm painting on a flat canvas, and I'm using liquid paints. So I'm adding different mediums to an acrylic paint to expand, and I add a bunch of different things. I say it's kind of a science project meets an art project,
Right.
because the different mediums react with one another and create different designs on the canvas. So that's a little bit of an overview of the style that I do. And I was particularly drawn to abstract, and especially this kind, because it's this real relationship that you have with the paint. So I'm not sitting down to paint a portrait of someone's dog or family. Trust me, you don't want to hire me for that job. But I like that some of the responsibility is within the artwork itself. So it's this real relationship that I have. It's about feeling. It's about flow. It's about intuition. I kind of know when something is finished. We speak to each other.
That's interesting. Yeah. I don't know if I've ever had anything like that. I'm very envious of people who have that sort of creative element. Because I'm a musician. I don't know if we talked about that, but I play guitar and stuff. But in terms of the creativity, I don't know if I ever really had that thing. The abstract art, though, is it's interesting. Like what kind of I guess initially inspires you? Do you just kind of go based on your mood, or you mentioned, okay, actually maybe back up a second. You mentioned there's like this balance between science and an art in what you do, right? Which is obviously true. You need to know how to hold the brush. You need to know the science of the different colors and all that stuff in order for you to be able to create a beautiful piece of art. So there is that balance. But yeah, I don't know where do you draw inspiration for some of this stuff, or does it kind of just come out naturally, or?
Creativity is such a strange thing. And I've often heard people say, everyone's creative. And I believe that.
I don't know if I believe that.
I feel like it's maybe not in the traditional senses, that everyone, sure, you might not sit down and be able to produce a Van Gogh. Like
Right.
Nor can I. But I've had a lot of different types of work in my life, and I've seen creativity expressed in lots of ways. So we were speaking earlier, I worked in government for 10 years, and there were several creative solutions discovered sitting around a boardroom table that one might not think of as creativity, but it surely was in that environment. So I think we have we deserve more credit maybe than we give ourselves for creativity. But what I guess what inspires me, or what I'm drawn to, is taking some of life's overlooked or smaller moments and thinking about how they feel. So that's what I want to capture in a painting. It's less about something tangible and more about how it makes someone think. So I want for you to be able to sit with a piece of abstract art and decipher it for yourself. I don't want to tell you what it means. I can do that from my perspective.
Right.
But my hope is that you see or feel or experience something that's unique to you. And that's the discovery, that's the relationship that you have now with that piece of art.
Right.
And I love that. I love getting that feedback. I title my painting sort of quirky to give a little bit of a nudge. So it could be my grandmother's china set.
Yeah.
And I'll use colors to me that might have reminded me of that, or something antique looking. And that might be a prompt for you to think about your own childhood, or it could be something completely separate from that.
Yeah.
So that's just an example of how I find myself drawn to abstract.
Yeah. It reminds me, the way you're describing it there, of music, actually, because a lot of songs, obviously the the musician writes it with a particular theme in mind. Like there's normally a particular meaning they have behind the song, but you can also take a song and completely morph it into having something that means something very specific to you. And it's interesting because it's hard to say that that's wrong. I know this gets a little iffy because some people would say, well, that's not what the artist meant. But I would even argue that that's not really the point of art anyway. I mean, the point of art is really, for me, it's some kind of representation of beauty, or some depth of feeling or emotion that may be difficult or maybe even impossible right now to articulate. And so you can listen to a song, for example, and feel all these emotions, but you might not be able to articulate what you're feeling, why you're feeling it, but you feel something, so you keep listening to it. And I think that's the same with all art, is that you just look at it. I mean, I don't know if you noticed when you came in, but that I don't know if you can see that on the camera. I'll have to put that on the episode, but that art for me, I found it online, of Gandalf, and that was just one of those with me. I stared at that for so long, and to decipher kind of what I thought it meant. But it took me a while to figure out what it meant to me, but it was just beautiful. It was just really nice to look at. And then like you said, you decipher it on your own over time, which is really a beautiful thing.
I love that. And I love that you pointed out that, in my opinion, art doesn't even necessarily have to invoke this deep, meaningful, buried emotion within you. It can simply be, that's beautiful to me.
Right.
And what's beautiful to you might be different than what beauty looks like to someone else. That's why you were attracted to that piece of art, and maybe someone isn't.
Yeah.
And how exciting. And it's funny that you talk about music too, because you're looking at, I was thinking about this morning, how music offers often a more literal sort of nudge about what it's meant to be.
Yeah.
So this is a clue about what I'm singing about at the very least. Yeah. Whereas abstract is kind of free. There's not a lot of, there's not a backstory about it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You can certainly, yeah, like you said, you can embark whatever you come to it with. It's kind of interesting, and maybe we can get into the dark side a little bit, because this is really where I wanted to ask you. I was fascinated when you said, and very excited to see the art that comes from this, that you're starting to go into or think about or consider the sort of darker elements of human experience, what Carl Jung would call the shadow. And this is something that I've always been fascinated with, but more so fascinated with that period, but I'm fascinated also with how people even start that road, because it seems to me that the last thing we want to consider is that we're not so perfect. You know, the last thing we want to consider is that maybe we have some dark stuff bubbling up inside of us, right? If that's bitterness or resentment or anger, jealousy, a lot of these things we just refuse that they're real, you know, because we don't want to admit that we have such feelings. So that first step into like getting into that sort of shadow, that darker work, I'm always curious, how do we get people to do that? Because I think it's hugely beneficial to do it. But so I'm interested for you. What got you interested in like the darker or the shadow?
This has been such an interesting, I'll say 6 months for me. Mm-hmm. It's only been, I'd say, in the last few weeks that I'm really connecting with what I'll call the shadows. Looking back, I've had so many different signs and symbols and things come into my life that I think were trying to get my attention in terms of embracing some of those negative emotions. So for the longest time, I've really connected with this idea of manifestation and positive affirmations and law of attraction, all of these things rooted in positivity. but I was having negative experiences, or quote negative experiences, that we're kind of taught we're not supposed to feel that way. Like we want to get rid of this feeling. And not only was I continuing to have some of these experiences and feelings come up in my life, but I was then on top of them feeling guilty that I was feeling bad. Yeah. There wasn't a lot of permission to process some of those feelings. So this summer I went completely deaf in one of my ears, and this just happened, like things do to people. And I have tinnitus in that ear all the time. And I took up running again, long distance running. That was a way of kind of being on my own, and I had headphones on, so the tinnitus was relieved from that. And I set this goal of training for a marathon. And I got 2 weeks out from that run, that goal I had set for myself, and suffered from an injury and had to stop running. And so these are just a couple of examples. There's more. But I realized how trying to run away from those experiences and how I was feeling wasn't getting me anywhere. It just kept coming back to me.
Right.
And I thought, there's something here I'm supposed to be paying attention to.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it was in that glimmer of clarity of, okay, what is this darkness? What is this shadow trying to teach you, that you and I connected? Yeah. So, and it reminded me about some of the older philosophical texts that I had studied in university, which I have since revisited. I'm talking fast because I'm so excited to tell you the story.
Yeah, no, it's great. Let's do it. I love it.
And I started, of course, looking more into Stoicism. And there were these different types of lessons and meditations about negative thinking. Yeah. And how you can actually use that to your advantage to ultimately pursue the same goal of feeling better and feeling positive and attracting that. But it wasn't dismissing all of these other emotions that are part of the human experience. Yeah. It was rather embracing them and using them to your advantage.
Right.
So I've really been thinking about that, of course, and trying to learn more about it. I feel like a baby still in all of this. I'm so new. But
baby Stoics. I call them baby Stoics. Yeah. I love baby Stoics.
BS, huh?
Yeah, BS. Yeah.
So I certainly don't claim to be an expert, but I feel excited to feel connected to something that's meaningful. It feels like I'm on the right path again. Yeah. And that I'm meant to be following this. And as an artist, it's now exciting to think about, especially something like the concept of shadows. I mean, that is a really rich subject matter to explore as a creative person. So that's where I'll be going next.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people get, and myself included, get kind of frustrated with people sometimes when they fail to recognize the darker sides. Like, for example, you have some people that will just say, well, just be positive all the time, right? Always be positive, always be positive. But like, if you're going through a rough time, that's like,
it doesn't help.
It's just not good advice, right?
Yeah.
Like, cause you're sitting here and someone's telling you, oh, all I have to do is just be positive, but I can't be positive. I have these thoughts coming in, and then you get the guilt and the shame with it. Like, you shouldn't be thinking these things. Whereas Stoicism would say, okay, you have this thought that's not so pure. Let's maybe not react to it. Let's take a step back. Let's dissect it, figure out where it's coming from. Maybe we can change it in the future, but let's not let it dictate our actions too much. Let's not get too impulsive on what that really means. And I think that's the better response, as opposed to just kind of putting it in a corner, because this was a real big fear of that Carl Jung had and Eric Newman, which was a student, is that if you don't address that, it's going to create its own life, kind of like a Jekyll and Hyde kind of situation. And it starts to become you're no longer aware of it. It's not in your conscience anymore. So you start doing things, bad things, sometimes mildly, but bad things, and you're not even aware of it. Yeah. And there's a real danger in that.
Yes, it stays with you. It can manifest in different ways. And looking back, that might have contributed to a physical injury in my running. Yeah. Like, this is something that was trying to get my attention. I wasn't processing it correctly.
Right.
But like you're saying, there's not a lot of support and encouragement for people to be okay with feeling badly. Of course, we want everyone to feel joy and happiness as much as possible. But you can't have those lived experiences without the contrast to it.
Yes.
I feel like we're trying so hard to run away from that we never really give enough life and energy to the thing that's actually ultimately bringing us that light.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you hit it right on the head. You can't even get the good without at least acknowledgement and acceptance of the bad.
Yeah.
What have you seen initially? Has that trickled its way into your art yet?
It's starting to. Yeah. Yeah. I'm really embracing, I'm using some new materials lately, but I came up with this project idea actually last night about losing my hearing. And my concept is having a series of paintings, say maybe 6 paintings. And the first one would be quite detailed and have all of that's representative of a prior sound. So my life experience was a lot busier. I was hearing things and more engaged, and sort of transition that into the final canvas being a lot more blank. And having fewer details representative of, that hearing loss that I've gone through. So is that something dark? It could be, if that's how it's interpreted. One could look at that collection creatively as this is a bad or negative experience I've had in my life. But for me now, at least, having come out of the worst of that and adapted to it, it's actually made me a more empathetic person. Mm-hmm. It's taught me patience. It's taught me to appreciate the hearing that I do have left on my other good ear or my other senses. And it's funny because in terms of Stoicism, and again, I'm new, so correct me if this is wrong, but from what I understand, they would teach you that embracing some of those negative experiences happen to you does make you appreciate the good that's around you more.
Yeah.
And so I've really been trying to connect with that instead of reacting to everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those interesting things because this is what I think makes people hesitant towards Stoicism, because in the Stoic sense, losing hearing in one ear or even both ears, it's not a bad thing. And so people say that and they say, well, what the hell? What do you mean it's not a bad thing? I can't hear it in my one ear. And it is a hard thing to accept. But what they mean is that you can use that to make yourself better. And that's up to you. And if you do that, that makes it good.
Yeah.
If you use it to complain and screw existence and screw the world, that's not so good. So it has a complete dogmatic focus on like character, right? But which is scary because I think we like to play the victim too sometimes,
Sure.
And we're all kind of victims.
Of course we are. We've all been through something, but I think that's when something happens to you, it reminds you of that human experience that's shared with everyone.
Yes.
So you can focus on yourself, and you should, when something happens, of course, give yourself some grace.
Yeah.
But also recognize that you're not alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask you because I want to learn from you as well. I was going to ask, like, would Stoics say that there is such a thing as a negative experience? Like, using that hearing example that you just described, would there be a case where, like they would claim, yes, this is just a bad thing that happened?
No. Unpleasant, but not bad. The Stoics were very, very dogmatic about this. Virtue is the only good. Character is the only good. There's nothing else good or bad, including pleasant and unpleasant things that happen to you. It's hard to believe some of this stuff, right? But then I don't know if you're familiar with Alexander Solzhenitsyn or Viktor Frankl.
Viktor Frankl, yes.
You know Viktor Frankl, okay. Yeah. So he went through something terrible, which a lot of people did at the concentration camps in Nazi Germany. And if you look at the good that came from him going through that, it's hard to look at that and say it was a bad thing.
And it's hard to look at that and say, if he survived that, it gives you the strength to hopefully survive whatever hardship you're going through.
Right.
Hopefully it's not that bad.
Right, yeah. For sure. But yeah, I mean, it's a hard pill to swallow, but it gives you all the power. That's the benefit of it. It's like, I lost my hearing. Okay, I can be pissed off about it, or I can decide not to be, find a way to live my life around it and get on with life. But certainly not an easy not an easy path.
Yeah, but it's also exciting. There are other things that I do to myself, I guess, such as, so I go cold dipping.
I have an ice bath upstairs.
Oh, do you
on
really?
the deck? Yeah. I'm a little nervous about telling people because they think I'm a psycho.
Well,
but yeah,
they do, but I don't. I see you. But that's one of those things. I've been doing it about a year now, and the first time I went, I was in for half a second.
Right.
And now I can go for multiple minutes. And I still get nervous. Yes, it's cold. It's uncomfortable. But I thrive in the uncomfortable feeling now.
Yes.
It's kind of like exercise for some people. Like for me, training for that marathon and the long runs, I grew to look forward to feeling unpleasant.
Yes.
Because getting over that, getting through that is far more rewarding than never having done it in the first place.
Yeah.
Which might sound obvious, but it takes me back to, there's been all of these clues in my life for the past number of months that have led me to a lot of these philosophies.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so exciting when you reached out. You were just sort of another one of these signs in my life pointing me to learn more about this. And in reading some of the ideas, it's like, oh my goodness, this is how I've been living all along. I didn't realize there was a community around it.
Right. It's so exciting, and I'm so happy you're into cold plunging. I have another psycho with me today. It's great. But no, I had the same experience. The first time I got in, it wasn't even that cold. It was in my tub, and I think it was probably like 15 degrees. But you get in, you can't breathe, right? Like you're just hyperventilating, and then like the first thing you have to learn how to do is just get your breath under control. But like now, it's still like, if you were to take away the how you're thinking about it, it's physically suffering. It's physical suffering. It's not comfortable at all. But you sit in there, and it's like anything, you get accustomed to it to the point where, you recognize it's kind of painful, but I've been here before. I know what this is. I understand it. It's going to be okay. And then you breathe through it, and it still can be hard to kind of get yourself to breathe properly, but you breathe through it, and you breathe through it, and eventually you get through it. And you can do that with ice baths. You can do that with anything, but I think the ice bath is a great place for people.
Yeah, it might sound like an unusual way to train yourself to think that way, but for me, the idea is that it then translates into other life experiences. So I can breathe through this thing. I can think my way out of this, or feel my way out of this, and it's good training.
What was the motivation for that in particular?
At the first time I went, it was completely about proving to myself that I could do something hard that I was scared of. Yeah. I'm scared of the water too.
Oh, really?
So it was really, and I'm a person who's freezing all the time. I'm wearing a wool sweater now, and so it was kind of conquering something that I thought to myself, I could never do that. Just not in a million years. Could you pay me enough money to go in the Atlantic Ocean in the middle of the winter for fun, or
Right.
And after even just doing it that one time, I just felt so good about proving to myself that, you can do that hard thing. Let's do it again. Let's do more hard things.
Yeah. I definitely relate to that, because it was for me as well. It's like, how many more hard things can I do in my... It's like, for me, I'm so interested in doing hard things pretty much every day, to the point where you kind of just do it, and then you don't even realize what you're doing anymore. And then you kind of take a step back sometimes and you look at yourself, and it's like, oh shit, like 10 years ago I wasn't doing any of this, and now I'm doing this, and now I'm doing that. But I'm interested. I suppose your ancestors are similar to mine in many ways. All my ancestors were fishermen, right?
Oh, really?
So I use this, which is common here in Nova Scotia. We're both from Nova Scotia, for the listeners, by the way. But I use that as motivation in the morning, because I get up and I think about all my ancestors that had to get up at the crack of dawn and go fishing all day in the cold, with gear that wasn't great. And I kind of, talk myself into it that way too. It's kind of like, you know, what are you going to do? All your ancestors did this. Like, you can do this. It's not a question of if you can or can't. It's like, do you want to? And like, are you going to wuss out this morning?
And not only that, but I think our brains naturally look for the path of least resistance.
Absolutely.
We have, especially in the last few years in the COVID times where most of us were spending more time at home in comfortable clothes and in front of our devices, more than likely, not always, but it's, I think, especially more difficult now for people to feel that sense of motivation because we were a little bit lazier than we used to be. Right. But we're always looking for those easy paths. Yeah. And it's not more complicated, like using the cold dip as an example. It's not more complicated than just going and doing it.
Right.
Like that's really, I think we're looking for this enlightening methodology to feel a certain way. And it really boils down to, are you going to do it or not? You just make that decision.
Yeah. That was a huge learning thing for me too, that I really solidify this year. It's like, you're really, take away everything you have or own or have done. You're really just what you do today. Right? And that doesn't mean that you can't take rest days or anything like that, because that's all built into the process. But at the end of the day, that's all you are. Like, you are your actions right now, where you are in this present moment. And nothing in the past really matters. Like, I mean, so you and I, for example, we could stop ice plunging tomorrow. And then we're going to be the people that said, oh, yeah, I used to ice plunge, when people say that they ice plunged. Or you can keep going and keep doing it. You can be a person that ice plunges every day or every other day, however often you do it. So it really does get down to these daily choices, and you can't buy that. That was I gained so much clarity on that. You can't buy that.
What would Stoics say about identity? And I'm asking you that because if you look at yourself each day in this is who I am today, or this is my path forward, what would they, this is me learning again. Yeah. What would they claim about that process or routine?
Yeah. Well, the virtues, which cardinal virtues, justice, wisdom, courage, and temperance, I don't really like thinking about Stoicism like that. It's a very helpful, it is Stoicism, really, the cardinal virtues, but it's easier, I think, for most people to think of virtues as habits. So virtue, being a good person, it's what you do every day.
That's helpful.
So and here's a great example. If you go through the drive-thru and you say thank you to the person that gives you your coffee, you can be a person that does that every time someone gives you a cup of coffee. Or you can be the person that grabs it and drives off. Mm-hmm. You can be either one of those. Mm-hmm. If you look at the actions of someone who is polite, you'll say that they're a good person. If you look at the person who doesn't have that habit, who has another habit, a bad habit, of a vicious, and then vicious is like the opposite of virtue, right? Yeah. Vicious sounds really bad, but it's just like a not so virtuous habit. You would look at someone like that and say no. So it's really about like what do I have to do today to be a good person, and what do I do every day? I think that's like the better way of thinking about,
And those habits, I imagine, eventually become natural in that you're not thinking about saying thank you. That's just who you are. Yep. Therefore, your identity. And
then you become a virtuous person.
Right. Okay.
Like a virtue. This is so helpful. And, I've personally, for me, it's like if you look at a successful person is not someone who's done successful things. Someone who does things that lead to success every single day. Mm-hmm. It's like that's what they are. What's a virtuous person? It's someone who does virtuous things each and every day. It's like, what does that look like? Well, it looks like kindness to each other, and it looks like compassion, and it looks like upholding justice and all that, being courageous, speaking the truth. So sometimes you got to say things that might not be so comfortable. It's all of that. And if you can get into the habit of doing that, like you said, you become a virtuous person. You're not striving anymore. That's what you actually are.
And I imagine it's always evolving. I'm looking back when I left my government job, I was so trained for my day to look the same and, this commute and kind of high pressure work throughout that day. And whatever. This was the environment that I was in. And when I removed myself from that and suddenly I'm a full-time artist,
Right.
I almost went the opposite way, where I'd wake up every day without a plan, kind of embracing the change. But that went too far down the other route. And I was then
Right.
kind of just like, I'm a beach bum. And I wasn't getting anything done.
Right.
So I've since kind of recalibrated, and I'm more intentional about my time and structure. And
Yeah.
so I also like the idea that we're always evolving. We get to change our mind about things. We get
Yes.
to, if we did stop ice dipping tomorrow, it's
Yeah.
okay if you pick it up a year from now. You
Oh,
still
yeah.
get to do that.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
there's a lot of grace that sometimes we forget about too.
What has been some of the things that you've implemented in terms of intentionality? Asking for a friend, because I went through that same thing. It was like working from home, and then it was all of a sudden it's like I didn't even shower first thing in the morning like I always did. You get up, you shower, wakes you up, and you get ready for your day. So I went through that phase too, where it's, I kind of looked at myself in the mirror one day. I'm like, what am I doing, man? like I'm working from home, so I get to be a slob.
Oh,
it's
I'm
like
a slob now.
yeah,
Yes.
that's who I am now. I was like, no.
Well, and it's interesting because we feel like this is our desire. Like, this is
Yes.
what I really want. This is my
Freedom.
natural state. Exactly. But it doesn't feel good after a while. Like, this is I'm a little gross now.
Yeah.
So I've started putting more of a structure in my morning routine, but
Okay.
there's still things I very much enjoy.
Okay.
So I get up quite early. I get up around 5:30.
Nice.
I have my coffee. I read now. That was a tip offered to me from a friend who I had on my podcast, who's a naturopath, and like stimulating the brain in that way instead of going right to my phone or my email that I
Right.
used to do. I go for a walk every morning now. I'm listening to more guided meditations. I always do a workout of some sort, but these are things that work for me. Some people like to
Yeah.
work out in the evening. Like, this is just, but having that routine, when I wake up now, I look forward to my morning.
Yeah.
And I think if I can establish a positive first impression to the day, you're setting yourself up for something better than just, laying around and getting up at 8:30 and not showering.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I did that too.
Yeah.
And it was fun for a while. I thought it's what I wanted. And
Yeah.
maybe it's what I needed then.
Yeah.
But it feels really good to put some more motivation back.
It's
in my
so
blood.
interesting that you said sometimes we want things, but we don't realize it's probably not what we actually want. Yeah. God, it was so. Anyway, I'd be interested to know. I guess, is it the same every morning, or do you kind of feel your way through it, or do you have like a first 3 things that you do?
It's more or less the same. I would say environmentally that might change if I'm
Yeah.
at my dad's or traveling, visiting. Of course, that routine would change, but because it's something I now enjoy and I'm feeling the benefits from it. It doesn't, like we were talking about earlier, saying thank you at the drive-through. It's not something I really consciously think about so much anymore. It's just a natural rhythm that I've established. And usually around 10 o'clock is when, I know it sounds like a long time, 5:30 to 10, that you're just like walking around and meditating, but I really take my time. And come 10 o'clock, that's when I start my work day.
Yeah.
So that could be going into my studio. It could be answering those emails. It could be any number of things that an entrepreneur does that I'm learning about all the time.
Yeah, it's so great. I've noticed the same thing for me. It's I don't rush, but when I start working, I'm working.
Yeah.
So it's very intentional. But same thing for me. I get up, I read. I do the ice bath first thing in the morning, because
Do you do it every day?
I try.
Yeah.
And when I say try, I mean I travel for work sometimes. I kind of every day I'm home, I'll do it, and I'm trying to implement cold showers, which seem to be harder for me.
They are.
Yeah.
They're awful, guys.
They're terrible. No. Yeah, no, don't. But I think it's the running water. You know what I mean? Because it's like you always have new water hitting you, and it's like
sometimes. So when I go in, I'll kind of squeeze my arms close together, and even if I lift them up a little bit, like you're saying, in that new water gets in new crevices, it's like you're experiencing the first coldness all over again. So
that's the worst. Because and the thing with shower too is you got to turn around, like if you want to get it all over your body. So you get on your back, and it's like, okay, and now I'm used to that. And you turn back to your front, and you're like, oh my god, what am I doing? But yeah, I try first thing in the morning. I like to do things extreme when I start something. It's like how crazy, like what's the time of day that I would want to do this the least? And it's like in the morning, in winter, right, when you're cold and your bed sheets are warm and the house is cold and you have to go and beat down the ice before you can even get in the damn thing. Like that's for me.
Do you still feel rewarded doing it so frequently? Like, is that aftermath consistent still?
Yeah, so far I think so. I definitely get a bump from it. But it's also like you said, which is interesting, I enjoy doing it. It's not even like I do it and then I enjoy it after, which I do, like because you do get that rise in dopamine, but it's more so for me now, I just like physically doing it.
I'm not an adrenaline junkie. I used to be more so than I am now. But I like the feeling of feeling tough. And capable and strong, and like that feels good. But it often requires going through something uncomfortable to get the reward. And I think that's what stops people. It's hard when you're looking at that body of water that you know is just cold as hell. To think about, I'm going to feel good though in 5 minutes from now. Right. You're thinking about the now, which I suppose you should, but there's something to be said for how empowering it can be.
Well, and I've had mornings too where you haul ass out of bed and you sleep in a little bit and then you get in and you're looking at your watch and you just don't want to open up that door, man. Right? It's like the last
you got
to
shovel snow out of the way.
Oh my god! And like 10 minutes would go by, and I do 3 minutes every morning. So then it's like, okay, I could have done this 3 times. Right. So then you start like throwing the guilt on. But eventually you just got to do it. And I did one with my brother actually over Christmas. And it was so interesting.
His first one.
He's quite a bit younger than me. He's only 15. So he was, I'm trying to toughen him up a little bit, right? But we were driving out to the ice, to the pond, and and I was watching him say the things that I thought in the morning, which is basically trying to talk yourself out of it.
Right.
It's like, oh well, what if we get a cold from this? Or it's like, I don't know, are we gonna be able to beat down the ice? And it was like, I don't really have my sandals with me, and I'm like, listen, man, you're just trying to talk yourself out of it. And it's like, I know that.
What a great reminder for you.
Yes,
to hear it from someone else who's not concerned with holding it back.
Well, it's so great. But it does give you a bit of everyone goes through that, right? Everyone feels that reluctance to do it, trying to talk yourself out of it. I'm sure you feel that.
I read recently that resistance is a very natural feeling to us as well, and that you might call it procrastination or like whatever that experience feels like for you. And it's funny because I feel that way before I paint every time.
Really?
Which is strange because I love doing it. There's lots of things I enjoy doing, but there's always a little bit of this feeling of I'll wash the dishes first, or I don't know if I've got all the right materials set up, or it's going to get dark and my light isn't going to be as good. And it's weird because I go through this process. I've been doing this for almost 10 years and every time it's the same. So I'm trying to embrace and recognize that this is just part of the process. It doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't make me a bad artist, or it doesn't mean that I don't enjoy this thing. It's actually something that apparently we all kind of go through, even if it's enjoyable things.
That's so interesting because a lot of people think, again, to get back to the whole pleasant and unpleasant being good or bad, it's like people say, well, I wish I wasn't nervous before presentations, or I wish I wasn't nervous before talking to my boss. It's like, what makes you think that's a bad thing? That you have a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of nervousness, a little bit of self-doubt. Like what? I know it's uncomfortable, but why do we think that uncomfortable is bad? I mean, we just established that we sit in very cold water.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly it can't be that
Trying to
bad.
promote this.
Right, yeah. Sponsored by cold water.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know. I guess we use language first and foremost to describe things as good or bad. We've decided collectively that that's what they are. Anxiety is a funny thing because this is something else that was shared with me on from this naturopath who I referenced, that she often hears in her practice that people will come in with anxiety, and she helps them dig deeper into that.
Yeah.
Like, are you anxious, or are you scared or tired or nervous, or any number of things? And in some cases, maybe you're excited.
Yeah.
That feels similar. I still get nervous when I go cold dipping, even though I've done it hundreds of times now.
Right.
The anticipation of it, perhaps, but there's also some excitement in there as well, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. Well, the first morning I did it, the night before, I was like going to bed and I was just thinking about it. Like,
Didn't sleep.
It didn't sleep, and it's so crazy. And then you think about it, how often we do that with everything else in life. We know something uncomfortable is coming, and we spend so long dwelling on it, having anxiety about it. Like, I'm doing an ice bath 7:00 tomorrow morning. I'm not thinking about it now like I was when I first started doing it. It's like, well, what's changed? It's like I have a different perspective on it. I've been through that. But we do that with so many things. We get caught up in the future, worrying about this and that, even expecting some things, and then getting upset when the expectations don't turn out to be true.
So true. And it robs you of the experience that you could be having today.
Right now.
Because you're worrying about tomorrow.
Yes.
That's important as an artist as well, because we often have an idea in our mind, and what appears on the canvas, no matter what style you do, is not going to be exactly what you had thought.
Yeah.
So you have to learn that that's not disappointing. It's not a failure. It's just something other than what our brains are capable of creating versus what our hands are capable of creating.
Right.
So that's been a good lesson too, is that it's different. It's not what I thought, but that doesn't mean I didn't do it right.
Yes.
But that's a hard lesson, especially in art. I mean, you conceptualize something so grand and beautiful, and if it's not that, does it still qualify as a success?
Yeah. That's interesting. So I never thought about it like that. That that artist would have that expectation of what the outcome will be in terms of what the art actually is.
And I'm sure anybody can think of a other life example. It could be a social event that you're going to where you hope that you're going to meet somebody there and they're not there. Or does that mean that it wasn't fun? It just wasn't what you expected.
Yeah.
So it's finding some, I guess, acceptance that it was this experience instead.
Yeah.
And I think that's the danger in anticipation and dread for something, especially because you spend all this time preparing yourself for it to be potentially awful, like going to talk to your boss.
Yeah.
And maybe it's great. And then you think back like, wow, I wish I hadn't stayed up all night worrying about that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's reminds me of a Stoic quote. I think it was Seneca. He said, "We often suffer more in imagination than in reality."
Right.
And that's so true. I mean, a lot of the suffering we have is in our head. And one of the things, not to keep plugging ice baths, but one of the things that's really reinforced is if you just feel what you're going through, it doesn't seem to be as bad. Like if you just sit in it, you're physically sitting in something uncomfortable. If you can just learn to sit through it and breathe through it, it takes away a lot of the power, because a lot of the suffering, like I suffer more in the minute before the ice bath than during the ice bath.
Yeah, good call.
Right? Like, what the hell?
Yeah, and there's the light, like we'll use the ice bath as the shadow, and then the light is stepping out, and there's endless health, physical benefits. But your state of mind, at the very least, is I just survived this really hard thing. Yeah. This shadow, this darkness I have stepped out of. And would you have felt as rewarded and, positive had you not done that? Yeah. You risk kind of just staying in this comfortable, neutral mood forever.
And it's tricky too, because sometimes you do have a good excuse not to do things.
Yes.
So it's about
that's true.
There's some discernment too, right? Like I had a cold there a couple weeks ago that was really bad, and that was a rough thing for me because I'm thinking, should I still do the ice bath? Yes or no? It's like, well, I got a cold, but it seems to be just in my head, so it doesn't really matter. And that's really what wisdom is, I suppose. It's like picking apart what excuses you're coming up with and then deciding. It's like, okay, I don't want to be uncomfortable. Well, that's not a good excuse. Let's just get rid of that one. It's like, oh, I'm tired. Well, what the hell? That's not an excuse. Like, let's get rid of that one. And then maybe you find one that's an actual excuse, but you have to almost daily go through that sometimes, like you did with your art. That every step you have to kind of retell yourself. You have person A and person B, and they're fighting. And hopefully the artist wins, right?
Well, hopefully, yes. I love the idea of person A and person B too. This really became clear for me when I was training with my running, because I was able to kind of separate my physical body from me, really, my mental body. And I would talk to myself.
Yeah.
I probably looked a bit odd out there if anybody saw me on Rails to Trails talking along, but if I was starting to physically get tired or experience pain, I would speak to that part of myself and say, like, I got you. Like, I will get us there, though. I will get us over the finish line. Like, I know you're tired. I know you're hurting. Don't worry about it. Like, I'll take the lead. And that would kind of go back and forth depending on where I was at. If I was in a weird headspace that day, the body part of me, the person B, would then chime in and be like, it's okay. You don't need to think anymore. Like your legs are going to take over. And that helped motivate me. It helped me get through the training. I'm sure we all have our own tricks, and that might be a lesser known one, but I felt comforted to feel like I always had a friend with me.
Yeah.
And sometimes that other self that lives in our mind, some people call it the roommate, that's not moving out ever, that can be our worst enemy. But that training really helped me befriend that other part of myself and actually use it as a buddy to help me through.
Yes, because you don't want to spend that much time with an enemy.
Right. And if they're not going away, but I'm sure people get stuck there. Of course they do. People with any version of mental health challenge. I mean, there's parts of us that they're tricky, they're sad, they're hard.
I often think of those two parts as like the stronger self and the weaker self, and not to be too harsh on the weaker self, because it's almost like the relationship between a therapist and their client, or even like a parent and their child. Like you don't hate the child because they don't want to work hard. You say, well, they're a child. They haven't learned a lot of these lessons yet that they have to learn. So you kind of, and they say, oh, well, Dad, I don't want to do this. You say, oh, no, I know, but we got to. And you're not angry at the child. You're not mad at the child. And that's the same thing that happens in your head. It's like, oh, I want to stay on the couch. It's like, no, we're not going to. It's not like, no, shut the hell up. We're not going to. We're going to get out there. Sometimes I got to do that myself, but that's not the better way of doing it. The better way is like, no, you're just not right. And I'm not mad at you, but you're not right. We have to go do this.
The way that we speak to ourselves is top priority.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And it feels like we're often looking for these external sources to show us the way. Tell me what to do. But I think it's so often these things are so simple, as such as the just do it philosophy.
Right.
Like, it's not more complicated than just walking into the water kind of thing. But we're kind of mean. We're our worst enemies at time. We judge ourselves, or I hear from a lot of artists, especially, that they feel like they're not enough, or they have imposter syndrome. There's a lot of judgment that comes. There's always somebody that's better. Like, well, sure, that may be true, but there's also something to be said for just telling yourself that you're enough. Like, just even if it feels like lying in the beginning, you'll get there.
Yeah, it's a bit of both, right? It's like you have to tell yourself that you're enough, and that you could be so much more, right? Mm-hmm. And I think normally people struggle. They have one of those, and they don't have the other. They tell themselves that they're enough and then they never improve. Because if you're enough, why get better?
Right.
But if you also say, well, you have so much to work on, and you're worthless, you have no worth, you don't do anything, right? Well, that's not true either. Like, neither of those statements are true. It's kind of it's a paradox that it's always fascinated me that you do need both.
When you're looking forward into self-improvement or growth, are you imagining an end result then? Or are you just kind of every day waking up, not thinking about the future, but putting into practice something different?
Yeah, it's complicated, right? Because there's something said, so if you're a marathon runner, you might have heard, like, you have to enjoy the process. Mm-hmm. That's something that a lot of people, it's really popular in the gym, but I guess it's all walks of life. That's really what it is, but it's not as simple as that. It's like you focus on the process. So yes, you get up and you do what you got to do every day, but you also have to be aware of where you were yesterday and where you are today so that you know what you're doing is working. So you ultimately detach yourself from the outcome. Mm-hmm. But because the idea is, what do we have to do on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday? What do we have to do on each of those days to get us to where we want to go? How do we optimize that? Well, we try something. If it moves us closer, okay, that's better. Is it optimal? Can we improve on a few things? Can we do an ice bath every morning, right? Like what more can we do, or what can we take away to improve that process? So it needs to be updated as you move forward in time. Does that make sense?
It does. And what happens when you reach that goal? So let's say, I don't know anything, like what's a good bench press weight?
225.
225. Okay. Yeah. So let's say your goal, you're like, this year I'm going to bench press 240. And maybe you wake up each day and you're training and you're adding a little bit of weight, and then you're taking time off because you have to do that. You're doing all the right things. What happens when you reach that 240? Like mentally, as far as goals go and the pursuit of self-improvement.
That's the thing that a lot of people struggle with. Everyone struggles with. What happens after enlightenment, right? What happens after achieving the goal? I hate to get too weird on this, but there's this Indian story I have to tell you. So there's a guy, he was looking for the answer to what is enlightenment. Like, what does it mean to be enlightened? So he traveled the world. He went everywhere trying to find the answer to this question, what is enlightenment? And he was climbing a mountain one day, and he saw this old man, and he had a bunch of rocks on his back, and he was hunched over, like struggling under the weight, moving up the mountain. And the guy had this, intuition that the old man knew the answer to this question. So he yelled out, he said, "Old man," he said, "what is enlightenment?" And the old man drops the sack of rocks, and he stands up straight. And he said, I get it. So that's enlightenment. It's like, it's this freedom. And he said, okay, I got one more question. Sorry, but what comes after enlightenment? And the old man smiles, and he picks back up the sack of rocks, and he continues up the mountain. This is like one of the hardest truths, I think, of life, period. You never get there. Yeah. You never get there. People think you're going to get there. You think you're going to make this amount of money, get that house, get this car, and you're going to be happy. It just doesn't exist. It just doesn't exist. And that sucks. Right?
It's such a great story. I'm so glad you shared that story.
I love that one.
It's such a clear way of understanding the value of challenge, because you're right. It's never going away. And thank God.
Thank God for that.
And I know it's hard to accept that in the moment. Like the day I woke up and I couldn't hear anymore, I was not celebrating it that day. Right. But I understand now that what a bore our life would be if everything just went my way all the time. Yeah. Yeah. So there's some celebration in the aftermath of reaching that goal. And I guess, day to day we set new goals, or maybe in different areas of our life, but yeah, we pick the rocks back up eventually. Yeah. That's something have you particularly struggled with that? With moving on after achieving a goal? Yeah, like how do you think about this growth towards, it's interesting with art, because art, as you mentioned, it's this balance between science. So there is this development part, but then there's also this creativity element, which is sort of
not understood and just kind of happens sometimes. But
Right.
right. So
I feel fortunate that I don't have a retirement date. There's no end to it. If anything, it's my concern is that I won't get to do all of the things I want to do that are in my mind. So I have goals, of course, that I set for myself, but there's always, creatively speaking, there's always going to be another one on the horizon. And that's what feels like such a gift about this being what I was chosen to do. How lucky am I?
yeah.
Like if I lived fortunately to be 65 in my old work, what would I then do? And you often hear of people that retire and they either go back to work or there's a little bit of this lost feeling.
Yeah.
I don't think I'll ever have that.
Yeah.
So the idea of I've achieved goals, but it never feels final. It always feels like there's something naturally that comes after that. But what I've struggled with that I have to really check myself in is a feeling of feeling unsatisfied.
Yeah.
That is, because you do always want more, because you do always want to create more. It's hard to feel like you've done enough or there is an end point.
Content.
Yeah.
That oh God, I struggle with that. Have you found anything that's been helpful towards?
I think having more ease in my life.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the Stoic meditations that I've been doing, it essentially, so for example, it'll tell you to sit in your house and look around at where you live, what your house looks like, what do you got, what's your furniture like. Most of us naturally might aspire for a bigger house or a new kitchen sink or a renovated bathroom, whatever it is. But they invite you to imagine yourself living in the very first apartment that you ever moved into in college. Or a tent that we see lots of people having to survive in these days. That perspective helps you achieve gratitude in a more authentic way, in a real way.
Yeah.
For me, doing a gratitude practice and just sort of listing off things I was grateful for, like, yes, I'm grateful for my morning coffee and, you can go through this thing, but it was more about the exercise for me than how I really felt. But thinking about it, comparing that history, there's always somebody that wishes they had what you had.
Always.
And you're always going to wish that you had what somebody else had. And for me, thinking about it in that way has really helped me find that more daily content, grateful feeling in a real way, not just because I should. I actually feel it now. Yeah.
It's so interesting if you think about where you were a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's like you're sitting here discontent about something, about your life, period. And then you look back, it's like, Jesus, this is where I wanted to be 5 years ago.
Right. It's such an important check-in.
Right. And again, to get back to a hard truth, I don't think there's any other solution to that other than, like you mentioned, just a daily practice of gratitude, because we do take things for granted all of the bloody time.
Well, even think about, most of us have been sick at some point over the last couple of years, and it's just something so simple that you take for my hearing. Like I spent my whole life taking that for granted. Of course, who would have ever thought that one day you just wake up and you're deaf in 1 year? Like that doesn't happen to people, right? But there's any number of examples of things that we experience, and you wish you had that back. You wish you had that life again. So it's easier said than done, and I'm certainly, it's very much a new practice for me. I think sometimes the way that something is described, like your story about the man carrying the rocks, like hearing that makes you understand something. And sometimes how you hear it or who you hear it from, the way it's described, is all you need to really embody it, instead of it just being like, I've heard that before. Like, sure, I'm grateful and this and that. But
I've thought a lot about that too, because I've learned some things from people, and someone else has told me that same thing, but I didn't really make the connection. And the more I think about what's the difference there, a lot of these truths that we have, it's like we know them because we've been told them so many times, like work hard. But a lot of people don't really understand why. So like, God, I'm so fortunate to have people in my life that really knew, like when they tell you something, they're not repeating it. They've done the due diligence. They've really thought about it. They've lived the experience. And I guess to put it simply, they mean it.
Yeah.
They really mean it when they say it. And you can kind of feel that.
Yeah, I think it's a feeling.
Yeah.
I think exactly what you said. You can know lots of things. Like, I understand this and I believe it to be true, but sometimes it's hard to really feel it.
Right.
And I don't have the answer on how you do feel it. Sometimes it's about experience. Sometimes it's about who you're hearing it from. Do you have any thoughts on that, in like how you might advise someone to really embody something that they know to be true?
Oh, God.
You didn't know I was interviewing you, did you?
So you're talking about something that someone knows, and maybe they have some faith that it's true, but they don't really know it yet?
Like, we know we should be grateful for a roof over our head.
Yeah.
But sometimes that's just something that you hear and you're like, yeah, I get that. I believe that we should be. But you're still in your mind thinking, I wish I lived here. I wish I had a bigger house. Like, what's the connection between learning a lesson or reading about a lesson, for example, and really feeling it in your body?
It's just, I think it's perspective. I think you really have to put yourself where you were, or where someone else is, which sounds kind of mean in some way, but like I've read a lot of World War II history. Just things so terrible you couldn't even imagine, right? That happened during that.
You're into all the really light things.
Yeah, all
life,
light
huh?
things.
I
All
can tell
light
this
things.
about
That's
you.
right. Yes. It's life, but positivity, right?
Yeah, surface level guy.
That's right. But no, I just got really into some of that darker aspect of human psychology. But I don't know. I don't think you can really appreciate like what we have until you really understand what things could be, how bad things could really be. So, you say, well, be grateful for your house because not everyone has a house. Okay. Why don't you sit down for 5 minutes and try and think about what it would actually be like to be homeless? Mm-hmm. What if you go talk to a homeless person?
Or go be homeless for a day.
Homeless. Yes.
Yeah.
That's the most real way. Mm-hmm. Really experience it.
Turn the heat off in your house and sleep on the floor, at the very least.
Yeah.
Like, maybe, this is me just, throwing that out there now, but it's been almost 10 years ago. My mother passed away. She had cancer, and I was her caretaker for a few years. Actually, they gave her 3 months. She lived 3 years. So she was a real fighter. But one of the most vivid memories about that experience was how a sense of grief offered such clarity. Yeah. So here I was going through this highly emotional, sad, painful experience. But for the first time, maybe in my adult life, I felt such clarity about what was meaningful and important to me. Yeah. I just didn't care about all the little things and I know that sounds a bit cliche, but I felt it.
Yeah, you knew it.
Because I went through this thing.
Yeah.
So I think, yes, like putting yourselves in those real life experiences, like being homeless for a day, or like, that really taught me something. I can imagine it. Somebody else could have told me about their experience and I would believe them, of course.
Right.
Going through something like that and truly feeling it is a whole other thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And to get back to another hard truth, those things are uncomfortable.
Yeah, sure.
Like, for you to really, let's say, flourish and be happy, you got to think about some things that you don't want to think about. You have to do some things you don't want to do because you just can't. And that's such a hard thing. It's like for you to have a pleasant life, you have to do unpleasant things.
Yeah.
It's like, who created that?
Who made up that rule? That jerk.
Yeah, right? Like, why was that decided to be a natural law? Because that kind of sucks too, right? Mm-hmm. But it's true. I mean, I absolutely agree with you, Get out, be homeless for a day.
Yeah. And some of the pleasantries, we're describing it now as having contrast to that. So you have to get cold before you can step out and wrap yourself in the blanket and feel the reward. But I think the more that you practice this way of thinking and way of living, those unpleasantries become part of your pleasant day.
They do.
So that's been a really positive thing too. In like for me, I was describing having more of a structure now. If I did that right away, it would have been like, oh my God, I'm just stepping from one routine into another.
Yes.
But I now understand that incorporating some of those unpleasant things, or they felt that way in the beginning, are now things I look forward to.
Yeah.
Like you waking up every morning at 7 and it doesn't feel as scary anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe it does. But
No, now it's just like I'm not negotiating. That you mentioned just do it.
yeah.
For me, it's like I'm not negotiating. So it's kind of like, again, got that kid in my head. It's like, I don't really want to. No, we're not talking about this. We're just going to go do it.
Right.
And sometimes, actually, that is what you have to do with people, I think, that are like children. I mean, there's a reason why you have to walk children through life, because you have to physically like walk them through life for them to learn.
Grab their hand and pull them along.
Yes. Yeah. You need to do that, and that's kind of what you need to do with your weaker self, because you can't get rid of it.
Are you always upping the ante on personal challenges?
Yeah. Yeah. But you know, I mean, I go through phases too, like everyone else.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone goes through phases where you fall off the bandwagon a little bit. You know, you sleep in a little for a couple days, and it's very normal. But I just always think it's like, to get back to, you mentioned being satisfied. It's like you got to be content, but you also kind of got to not be satisfied. I think that's also important too, right? It's like, okay, you see some success. It's like, how much is enough? I don't know. But I know one thing: if I can get more efficient, if I can get more disciplined, if I can do harder things, that's probably a good thing in the longer term. So that seems to be a good goal. What's the upper limits? I don't know. We'll find out.
I've been trying to step back from external influence, meaning there's often an social idea of what I should look like, or what I should be eating or consuming, or even what art I should be creating. This is what's popular now.
Right.
It's very easy to be influenced by even masters. Like, this is what the masters did and it worked for them, or this is what a highly successful person did and therefore I should replicate their routine, their strategy. I've been trying to separate myself and just really think about what is fulfilling to me, which is like stepping into this void in lots of ways. It's a terrifying feeling.
Why do you think that's important?
I think it's what's true. I think that until I really know who I am and what I represent, that my art is simply a reflection of that. I want to be able to really put my voice into my work. Yeah. And it's okay that it's not fine-tuned yet. I'm aware of that. And I'm aware that I'm more on my way now than ever before. So that's exciting. But I look forward to, it's important to me to get a little bit further along so that it can have that meaning and hopefully mean something to other people too. Be a little bit of that lighthouse.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Have you ventured into the death meditation part of Stoicism at all?
So I have 3 meditations left in my. I have the Waking Up app. Have you heard of that one?
Sam Harris's app, right?
Yeah. So it's not Sam Harris that has this particular. There's like a Stoicism module.
Do you know who it is?
Oh gosh, I don't. I should by now because I listen to his voice every day. But I'll pull it out for you when we go upstairs.
Does he have an accent?
There. No.
Okay.
But he. I've got a few left. The module ends with the death stuff.
Okay.
Appropriately.
Yeah, it has to.
Yeah, but it's there's consistency in the lessons, and what I've really enjoyed about it, like I sort of mentioned earlier, was that I feel like the lessons I'm learning are practices that I've already naturally implemented in my life, without realizing that they belong to this title.
Yeah.
So it feels like, oh, I belong to this thing, or this feels right. Feels like I've been guided here. but I only know a tiny bit. So,
well, I feel like the general philosophy as a way of life of Nova Scotia seems to be pretty stoic. That's something I've naturally found, and I think it's because of the humble industry that dominates the economics, or maybe not now. I don't know what the numbers are now, but fishing. It's predominantly a province of fishermen for a very long time, and when you have to deal with the weather, and like it's just so real. You're in cold weather, cold water, hauling up things from the depths of the ocean, right, to try and feed your family.
Yeah, just living in Nova Scotia, you're doing the hard things already. Huh?
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that naturally creates that stoic mindset.
Yeah.
I think it has to. And sometimes I wonder what the hell my ancestors were thinking when they came to Canada, because most people, maybe most smart people, went on to Ontario where all the job opportunities were, but some decided to build a house and have a humble life and fish to support their families, and in a very harsh environment, you know.
Do you feel you were meant to be born into the life that you have?
That's an interesting question. Ooh, I might throw that back at you first.
I do now. I think I go back to resistance. Certainly as a 15-year-old girl without a driver's license who lived in the absolute middle of nowhere farm community growing up, I didn't feel like I was meant to have that life. Because you know, you're a kid, you want to be with your friends. And
of course,
I always kind of had a knowing within me that I would do something else with my life. I wasn't going to stay in that small town. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but it felt intuitive from a young age. I think I'm more comfortable now with the idea of this being exactly where I'm meant to be.
Do you, and you feel, I suppose what you're talking about there is that sense of belonging.
Yeah. I feel that more as I grow older.
Yeah.
For a number of reasons. And even most recently, I think that's why I feel so excited about meeting people like you, because it feels like I belong to something.
Yeah.
I didn't really realize how much that mattered to me until I realized I didn't have it. And I thought I was identifying with a completely different spiritual path. You know, you'll see lots of public speakers and famous people that are claiming all of the same lessons, which I'm sure work for a lot of people. They weren't working for me anymore. Yeah. So I kind of went through this, well, I'm not super religious, like I don't belong to that. And I thought this is what I believed in. I thought this was my guidepost. And when I was kind of floating around in limbo, I didn't realize how bad that felt until somebody kind of pulled my hand and, you know, pulled me out of it and made me realize, like, you can belong elsewhere. Like if your beliefs aren't fitting over there, because I kept trying so hard to fit into that or feel like it was working for me. Well, try something new. And then I was like, oh my goodness, all along this has been kind of how I've been living anyway. It has a name.
Yeah. Yeah, that was beautiful. Yeah, I feel the same.
Yeah, good.
I really feel like I belong. I'm trying to think if I'm sure there's exceptions, but mostly I feel like I belong wherever I am in that moment. And you know, I left Nova Scotia when I was 9, went to Newfoundland, and very similar, right? Obviously, but people are cliquey out here in some ways. So there's like the Newfies and the Nova Scotians, but I've always felt growing up like there was that wall there, and I think part of that was self-made, because I don't think there was an actual wall there, because I don't think there's walls between any of us. I really don't. And that's a core Stoic belief, is that, you know, we all kind of share, we're all a piece of a bigger whole. And so you can really belong anywhere. That's sort of like the underlying principle. And then I did some traveling after I graduated university. And so I always had this calling to come back to Nova Scotia. And I guess when I actually came back, which was I guess 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, that was no longer there. It wasn't a calling to come back. It wasn't, I'm going back to where I belong. That was gone. It was, no, I belong wherever I am.
Oh, yeah.
And now I can come back, and it's like, you know, meeting people like fellow Nova Scotians and making, you know, having wonderful conversations, which when I was a kid, I didn't think that was available to me.
Yes.
Right.
That's such a soothing way of looking at life, that it's not about where your house is built, that you belong and are connected no matter where you are.
Yeah.
I heard something again recently that you can tell I've really been digging into this
Yeah,
before we met, but it was something to the effect of, there's no such thing as selfishness or altruism, meaning if I do something that's seemingly good for myself, it's in fact good for everyone, or the greater good.
Yeah.
The same as if I do something kind for you, I'm also benefiting from that. So it can't be one or the other. But that was such a liberating way of showing up in the world.
Yeah.
Like, I don't have to worry about feeling selfish, nor do I have to worry about, am I doing enough good out there? They're kind of one and the same.
Yes.
And you get to always feel connected.
Yeah. Self-preservation is really important, and this is a great way of putting it. The stoic action is the one that is good for you, and good for your family, and good for the community, and good for the world. Like, there's a circle of concern, and you have to have yourself aligned. Like, you have to know who you are, and you have to have your life together, and you have to take care of yourself. But the idea is that you extend that out to the rest of the world and find alignment, so that the best thing for you is actually the best thing for everyone else around you.
Right. Yeah, taking care of yourself is in fact taking care of everyone around you.
Anything less than your best takes away from the world.
Yeah.
Anything less than your best.
That's what it kind of boils down to. Like, that one piece of advice just meant the world to me.
Yeah.
It's just so freeing.
And we often too think that we can't be different, right? Because we feel different, right? Like, and I know I hear a lot of artists say that too, is that they kind of, because they have that creative element. And I kind of learned that that's all bullshit too, because if you look at a band is playing music in harmony. That's the feeling we're all after. Mm-hmm. When you listen to a great piece of music, the lyrics are aligned, the chords are aligned, the progression, everyone's playing. There's a bit of chaos in there, but there's order in there. There's a beat. And you listen to that. That's harmony. That's the feeling that we all want in life.
Yes, and I would argue that as the audience member listening to that band, you too belong to that harmony.
Absolutely, yeah. You share in that. Mm-hmm. But no one, but this is what's interesting, no one would look at a band playing live and think, well, the bass player is different from the drummer. The drummer is doing something different than the singer. Like,
here's hoping.
Yeah.
Yes. No, that's
so true.
No
one would
true.
say that. Mm-hmm. Yet, when we're different than our family, than our friends, than the world, when we feel like we're different, all of a sudden, why do we think that's a bad thing? Again, it's like a bass player is not doing the same thing as a guitarist or a singer.
Yeah. But if they weren't there, it would be much worse.
It wouldn't be harmony.
Yeah. We talked when we first connected a month or two ago about the harmony of a big city.
Yes.
I was talking about
that's right. Yeah.
walking the sidewalks in New York City, which is one of my favorite places to be. I also love being in the middle of nowhere in the woods, but I feel like I'm part of the harmony of that city, which isn't for everyone. It's a hard thing perhaps to achieve and embrace, because it's so different than especially what we're used to here in Nova Scotia. It's seemingly loud and chaotic and noisy and smelly and but if you can flow with that, it's actually just this beating heart. Yes. And you feel like you're one part of the band, essentially. Yeah. And I love that feeling of being able to find those moments of belonging, even in the most obscure places. Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. I felt that too. I know that I really love that you said that when we first met, because I thought a lot about that actually, because I felt that too. And a lot of people, A lot of people on the East Coast, Eastern Canada, don't like big cities.
No.
It's almost like, oh God, Toronto. I don't want to go to Toronto. And I fall victim to that mindset too sometimes, right? Because I lived there for a bit. But that's only part of the battle. You know, you complain about having to drive an hour and a half to get from Toronto to Toronto, right? Like Toronto is an hour away from Toronto.
Yeah.
But the other side of that is what you mentioned, that feeling of harmony, of like just flowing in the, not the mob. What's the way to talk about it? The people that are going to work in the morning, you know, and you're all kind of walking together. And,
like the rat race, or
no. I'm just thinking. Well, I lived in England for a little 4 months work term, and there was always like this group, it's like this herd of people that we would all commute together, because it was like, you know, there's only so many ways to get down the street. So you go down the main street, and so you'd all kind of congregate into this herd.
Yes.
Like on Walking Dead, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, you feel like you're part of it, and it wouldn't be the same if you weren't there. And I think if you can find harmony there, you can certainly find it in your home.
Yeah.
Where you're safe.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. So you feel very Nova Scotian now.
Yeah, I feel worldly, I guess.
Yeah.
Like you were saying earlier, it doesn't really matter. I appreciate being from Nova Scotia. I think we certainly have a lot to be proud of and celebrate, but I've been fortunate enough to do a fair bit of traveling, and I mentioned I did a artist residency in Colombia just last year and met artists from all over the world, and being exposed to other cultures was also a good reminder that we don't have everything right.
Right.
Or that our way is the only way, I should say.
Just because we do it right doesn't mean someone else does something different that is also right.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think those fresh perspectives are important, but can still be proud of where I'm from.
Yeah, for sure. That's the balance, I think, is we have to love from where we're from, but also understand that ultimately we're just a piece of a much bigger whole. Mm-hmm. But it's I mean, it's like everyone has a bit of love for where they're from, right? For home.
I hope so.
Yeah.
It's a nice feeling.
Yeah. For sure. That's very normal. Mm-hmm. And I think we should embrace that. But also understand that there's something bigger too.
Yeah, there's more out there.
Yeah, for sure.
Go check it out.
Yeah, go check it out. Get out of the province.
Yeah, go to New York.
Go to New York, yeah.
Join the band.
I took my dad to New York.
Yeah, how did he fare?
Oh, no, he did not like it at all.
No, I don't think my dad would either.
Oh, God. He's talking like small town fisherman, right? Just was not his cup of tea. And I don't know why, again, putting expectations on other people, but I was like, Dad, you got to see the city, right? Like, I know you're not going to like it, but it's something you got to do. And he did it. He walked through the streets, but was not having fun.
He survived.
Yeah. He was not living in harmony. God, trooper though. I guess should we wrap it up? Geez, we're an hour and 20 in.
Yeah, I'm a talkative gal.
Yeah, I feel like we have a lot more to cover. But no, it was a great conversation. I appreciate you coming on. It was a beautiful conversation.
I'm so happy to be here. I really feel like it was a bit of a divine connection, and the timing for you to reach out, and I can't really tell you how much it means, because it feels like it's your wisdom and just invitation has helped me kind of recalibrate a little bit. So thank you. It's such a gift.
No, it's a pleasure. It's really a pleasure to have you on. And I feel the same way. I feel like this conversation was meant to happen as part of the providential plan.
There you go.
Let's call it that. All right. Thanks again so much. Until next time.